The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family member was being evacuated, a group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. Today is Thursday, June 1st, 2023, and we have Kilauea still at its level of heightened unrest, ready to erupt but hasn't done so yet, keeps cycling through earthquakes up and down and up and down. Right now it's back up again a little bit, and so we'll discuss that a little bit. Mauna Loa is still quiet. So what we're going to do today is go into a little bit more detail on the earthquakes, a deep dive into earthquakes, and see where they are in space and time and all of that. While we await the volcano to erupt, Dane, how you doing, and what's going on with you?
Oh, doing good. Just keeping an eye out there. Every day it seems like it gets a little bit more rumbly, and then it dies off again. Just a little cycle that we got going, waiting to see when this thing finally pops.
Yeah, so there's a lot of just wait for it right now. Not much else to do. So I hope you guys caught our special presentation a couple days ago on Tuesday. That anniversary of the long time anniversary of the 1840 eruption. And we do have some schedule changes. Maybe you want to talk about up front here, Dane, before we get into our summary and dive into the earthquakes.
Sure. If we want to go ahead and do that now. So we have some complications coming up in the schedule. It's going to get a little bit complicated. I believe it's next Tuesday we have a special presentation as well. So let's start with that. Next Tuesday we have the Poiki special, episode 2 of the recovery. What was it? Recovery and the eruption series that we have going with the Kīlaueas and the sorry, I did not have this up ready to go.
Yeah, so yeah, it's the series that we're doing with the community to remember the 5-year anniversary of the 2018 eruption. Our first episode was Reflection and Growth that we talked with the community. The second episode is going to be Pohoiki, 5 years later, and yeah, join us on Tuesday, right? So it's a little bit different. So we're with you this week, Tuesday. Today is Thursday. We'll be back with you guys on Tuesday next week for this special episode here. And next Thursday, nothing, because we'll be busy with exercise.
Yep. And then the week after that, we'll be coming back on Monday, I believe, King Cam Day.
The 12th.
To do another, the 12th, yes, to do another update then. And this month is just kind of complicated for us. So we're jostling around the updates a little bit to try and keep people, with the volcano on standby, it's primed and ready to go. We're trying to keep the updates flowing and just got some tight time controls here.
Right on. Yeah, thanks for going through that, Dane. Yeah, so bottom line, just keep an eye out for some different scheduling coming up. Yeah. And if you don't have anything else, Dane, I'll get into our summary here.
Let's get into it.
All right, let me fix the screen here and get ready to share. So this week's Hawaiian Volcano Summary. Kilauea is still quiet, but getting ready to erupt still. Mauna Loa is still quiet and not getting ready to do anything as far as we can tell. This is a live view into Kilauea right now. You can see it's still fuming quite a bit. Gas is escaping from beneath this crusted crater floor. There's still magma underneath here. And there's more being injected into the volcano and building up pressure, causing a lot of earthquakes, ground tilt, all expressing as inflation in the volcano here. So, sorry there, that thing wasn't supposed to close, but technical issue there. Right, so to summarize Kilauea, here is the earthquake rates for the past year. You can see at the right end of the graph here that our earthquakes per week have been over 800 the last couple of weeks, and it looks like this week we're on pace to exceed that as well, right over here. And as you can tell, this has now gone on for a full 6.5, 7 weeks or so, which is exceeding the time that it took to build up to the January 2023 eruption. And is also exceeding the earthquake levels. That one built up to about 600 earthquakes per week, and now we're over 800 fairly regularly, sometimes a little bit less. You can see that this period of adjustment is pretty intense here for Kilauea, so we really are primed and ready to go. It's just a matter of the earthquake cycles as magma is injecting the volcano, building up pressure, pushing the ground a little bit out of the way. That generates the earthquakes. If the ground moves just enough, it can make more space, and then you can basically start to cycle over again. At some point, the ground won't move anymore, and then that's when it will have to pressurize and burst towards the surface, or burst, then to some crack laterally. Whether it's to the surface, it'll be an eruption. If it's laterally, it'll be an intrusion if it stays underground. But in either case, those things can still happen without a whole lot of buildup at any point now, given that we're primed for that situation to occur. So those are the earthquake rates. Looking at the map for the last month, here's how it looks on Kilauea. These are colored by depth, so really it's this cluster up here by Kilauea Summit. You can't even see the caldera under there. Are the main interest of the activity. There's still the feeder zone deep in Pahala, but it's unaffecting the surface directly. And we still have adjustment of the south flank over here. That's this big chunk of land that's just south of the rift zone, which itself is right in here. And you can see that as the volcano is pushing its way out from the summit, this piece of land is moving to adjust it, and that's what's making the space, generally speaking, something along those lines, in a smaller scale pattern that exists closer to the summit here as well. So it's still building up quite a bit, and if we look at the tilt, here is the tilt for the last month, rising about 11 microradians in that time, which is a fair amount, definitely noteworthy. So that's Kilauea, still ready to go. We're just waiting for the moment for it to happen. And on Mauna Loa, the story is earthquakes are still quite low. There is inflation still happening overall in the long term, so magma is coming into that volcano and collecting underground, but it's not pressurizing anything to the point where it's causing any earthquakes or anything like that. So that's when you know that the volcano is still in a steady state and it's not building towards an eruption. So that's all expected and normal for Mauna Loa. And that's our Hawaiian volcano summary for the week. So going into the main part of our update here, Dane, I thought we would just start by reviewing the monitoring first today. And starting off with today's daily update from USGS HVO, which is stating that the volcano is not erupting. It's still exhibiting signs of heightened unrest. Seismicity remains elevated, and no unusual activity along either rift zone. So there is still inflationary tilt and elevated seismicity. Daily reads have been variable, but over the past several months, both information and seismicity have been elevated beyond observations preceding the January 5th, 2023 summit eruption. They do note the rates are elevated beneath Kilauea summit and Namakanipaio, that's the campground area. And what they've been doing is reporting earthquake rates just for that area within the text here, which is a little different from the graphs we usually get. So they do note over the past 24 hours, there were 58 earthquakes beneath Kilauea summit. They're noting the most recent SO2 rate was still about a week ago at 120 tons per day. That's still within that volcanic background. So nothing really telling volcanically there, but it's still enough to be a nuisance for the, not more than a nuisance, and an actual health concern for all the surrounding residents affected by that. So volcanically in the background, but still an impact on people, and that still remains the biggest impact. So what I'd like to do is just go back and just note this number. Most of this other text has remained the same for most of the updates of the last week, but we can go back in time and look for the last week. So we're going to end today with 58 earthquakes, but let me go all the way back to 1 week ago on Friday, and I'm just real quick coming through here, and on Friday there were over 60 earthquakes, right? And then if we come to Saturday, there were over 90 earthquakes. And then we come to Sunday, there were over 120 earthquakes. And so it really was climbing to Sunday. Then come Monday, it drops back down to 80. Drops back down again on Tuesday from 80 to 70, right there. And from 70, it jumps back up to 93. This was a spike that we had in the last day and a half or so. And then finally 58 up to today. And so you see it went up, come down a little bit, but overall still elevated levels, varying of course, but still all of them heightened still. So looking at the monitoring here, there's our 2-day tilt at Kilauea summit. It's in the last day only risen 1 microradian over the last couple of days here, so it's rising pretty steadily, but nothing super abrupt or sharp that would lead you to believe something funny is happening, like an intrusion. It's just kind of ongoing, still swelling normally at the same rate. Zooming out, here's the last week. You can see that it was a little bit shallower earlier in the week, but has come back up, and maybe it's getting slightly steeper, but these little steepness changes are, as you can see here, are really not predictive of what happens next. And then finally, zooming out to the last month. But I thought what I would do is share with you guys a sand hill plot. Here's our normal plot that we see down here for Kilauea summit at Uikahuna, right? That same pattern up about that 11 microradians or so. But interesting to note that the Sand Hill station, which is a little bit further to the southwest there, still not summit region, isn't showing all the same signals necessarily, right? So one thing we talked about last week was this little tooth spike on a tilt where the ground rocked one way and rocked the other way. And if I scroll up here, we can actually see that this instrument is getting affected by the earthquakes. You can see here the couple little spikes and a little bit of a ground drop in between there, but nothing nearly as dramatic as you saw in the north rim. So this would be the north rim, this would be the south rim over here. You can see the south rim is closer to all those earthquakes. You see all these vertical spikes on the graph showing that it really is picking out a lot of that up. And overall, that pattern of larger long-term inflation as well. One thing that's interesting is if you look even at the very right end of the graph here, you sometimes see that there's it looks like a little earthquake event right over here with a small little offset, really tiny. But that one does not actually appear here on a Uikahuna station. Just to show how these things can be localized, it's kind of cracking and adjusting a little bit here, a little bit there, and it's not necessarily the same signal everywhere, but the overall pattern of it rising and swelling, that one is what's the same everywhere else, right? Even you can see some of these little surges that might have been closer to that summit region, the northwest of the summit region, don't show up in the southwest of the summit region here as much. So looking at the month of earthquakes, here we are, earthquakes per day now. Yesterday on this plot's now picking up the whole of Kilauea volcano, including part of its Pahala source. So our numbers are going to be overall larger than what I just read from the USGS reports. Remember, they said it was 93 total yesterday-ish. And we can see that this plot is about 150 or so right over there. So you can see this is not quite the same numbers, but the overall pattern is the same, right? It was high, went down, 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 came up high, went back down low again. That's the same. We're not quite as high as we had a pattern 2 weeks ago when we exceeded 200 earthquakes in a single day back on a 20th. However, it's still ramping up a bit, yeah, as you can see here. This is all looking pretty similar because really the background level was off the graph to the left now. It's been just a little over a month, but it was somewhere back in here. This was the background level way back in here. So more or less in this 50-ish range, we'll call it, right? And you can see now we're in this 150 range. So more or less on average for the whole volcano, we're about 3 times higher than the background now. And so we went from about 1 times higher to about 2 times higher to now we're at the 3 times higher, right? So that's kind of the third gear in the revving up to the eruption here. So getting there, but it hasn't popped yet. Looking at some of the other signals for the month-long time frame, we have lava depth coming back in to the record here, and not a whole lot of useful information in this very fine data. But what is useful is to note that even though it's a very fine scale, 388.6 and 388.45, it's still a downward trend, right? Which just means that the crater is still subsiding. It's not getting injected from below and filling up and swelling that way. That's something that's noteworthy from here, right? So it's not like magma is sneaking in there in any way. It's still deeper underground. And we can't tell as much from SO2 because there's no measurements in the last week, but you can see that the recent values have all been in this low background. And even when it varied a little bit higher in the last month, still within its background level of a few hundred tons per day. Right? And I call this background. It seems pretty low. This is all a matter of scale. If I zoom it out to the last year, here's a last year of SO2. And this gives you the full range of an eruption expected values from the tens of thousands to the 0. So here we are closer to the 0 than we are to the thousands. So wiggling a little bit, but all pretty minor compared to when an eruption actually begins. So it's expected the gas now, even though it is emitting at hundreds of tons per day, which would exceed EPA standards, it's still a lot less than we're expecting when eruption does begin. Okay, looking at the GPS for the last year, this is a summit, north to south, line distance. So when a line is going up, it means that the sides are getting further apart, distance is getting larger. So that's continuing still. We've seen sometimes where this line has seemingly flattened out a little bit more, it's steepened a little more, but overall the pattern is that of still spreading and inflating and bulging outwards and upwards everywhere. And I won't dig into that any more than we have in the past here recently because it's the same pattern. It hasn't really changed in direction that much. For comparison, here's that 1 year earthquake plot compared to that 1 year GPS plot. So you see here this period of the high earthquakes does correspond to this fairly steep rate of expansion, right? We can see that rate is a little bit steeper than what we saw through here. Definitely steeper than was that last 2 months of eruption. So not quite the same to count or compare that. But prior to that, prior to January 2023, that build-up phase right in there, you can see that we're steeper than that over here now. That's the interesting thing to note. Obviously, the volcano is changing. It's compressing. It's evolving its conditions, and so it's not going to be exactly the same threshold every time. Because it's putting magma into areas that maybe had voids and making them stronger that way. It's pushing the rocks around them, compressing them, and packing them in. So there's all kinds of things that happen that allow it to change its surrounding conditions, what the actual breaking point may be between eruptions. So still use that as a guide, and it seems like we're ready at any point since we've exceeded the past conditions there. So finally on GPS, at Pool 1 East Rift Zone, same pattern. That line is going down. The sides are getting closer together. It's sagging. Nothing's happening in Rift Zone. There's no magma going in there from this current activity that we can tell in here. So looking at the earthquakes, we'll switch over to a little bit more of our earthquakes in depth now. And just look at the map for the last month on Kilauea. Sorry, the last week here. So this is where that chart is plotting earthquakes. Most of those earthquakes are coming from the summit region here. But there are some picking up from Pahala as well, and there are some from the south flank coming in as well to that count. Right? That's why you might have some larger values than the text reports there. still, there is earthquakes for the last week. It's a little easier to see than the last month plot that we showed you guys at the top of the program here, but still really crowded. You can still barely see the caldera underneath there, right? And it looks like everything is fused together. It looks like this is all one big cloud there, like that, right? But as we discussed last week, and as I'll show you guys now, through a little bit more deep dive, this cloud over here in the northwest is actually a separate cloud from the one over here, and they do seem to merge together when you're looking at it from map view here. So let's get into that here a little bit. One thing before I show you guys some cross sections is just to note where those stations actually were. So the Uikahuna station is more or less in there ish, and that Sand Hill one is down in here ish. And so you can see like there compared to there. So it really is right over that heart of the action. And for that reason, I thought I could pull up the seismograph over at Sand Hill and show you guys the last 48 hours. Just so you can have some visual guide of what the record is actually looking like. Each of these little blue smudges is an earthquake. When they're, we'll call it maybe this size or so, or this size, that they can actually be located and picked up. But when you're these small ones, like these things, these guys right in here, those might not actually register as earthquakes anywhere. And so those are the micro earthquakes that we're showing that are actually also happening, but very localized and not being picked up and put on a map necessarily there. So if I scroll down to the bottom, that's the most recent time here at the bottom. Here was this morning. You see there's a bigger event and some following period of kind of flurry of activity happening right through there, and then slowing down more recently here. So every time it flurries up, it seems like it could ramp up to an eruption, but it still hasn't done it in over 6 weeks now. So we keep waiting and watching for what comes next there. All right, on map view, let's let this load here, and let me switch over to our earthquakes tag. Here are the last 24 hours of earthquakes on Kilauea. So I'm showing 21 events on here. And I loaded this up a couple of days ago, maybe it was yesterday. It was up at 54 at a particular point in time, right? So it really ramped up and came back down. Here is where the current events actually are. It's right in the caldera region, a little bit to the northwest, but not as many. A little bit to the northeast, but not as many either. And a little bit to the southwest, not as many there either. Interesting, that one there is at 2.9, a little bit larger earthquake, 1.4 miles down, and that's on that Kīlauea fault zone. So the east rift comes and bends like that. Southwest rift comes and goes like that. And right in between, there's this connector fault line like that, right? That adjusts this movement of the summit. So you can see that whole region is all active. This just from the snapshot of one day. Let's expand it out.